Welcome to the Education, Career, and Beyond podcast. We've combined life experience with young adult drive and ambition. Are you just starting to college plan? Did you finish your education and wonder, now what? Join us in this lively discussion about the topics you need to know to create the next stage of your life's dreams, careers, finances, education, and more. Brought to you by Voice for Heroes 501c3. Welcome to another fantastic episode. And I have to say that I was very happy to push live on the button of this one because we were having way too much fun behind the scenes and realized that maybe the audience, that you were all going to want to come in on this one. So here we are. We have our amazing usual co-host, Ed Sanderson, with us today. He is just such the foundational part of this show, and we're so grateful to have him. We have our co-host, Sophie Anderson, who has joined us back. If you follow this show, you will have met Sophie on prior episodes. She is just starting her first week at Georgia Tech. So go, Sophie. Myself, Amy Scruggs, always here. But today we have Bryan Gillette. And I have to tell you, the topic about endurance, you are going to know why when you meet this amazing professional. He has years as an outstanding executive in HR and in corporate world, but he also really specializes in endurance to the point that he has biked across the U.S. He has ran, I think, he's going to let us 200 some odd miles around Lake Tahoe, more marathons than I could even fathom wanting to attempt in a lifetime. And we're going to discuss endurance in life and in business. It's an honor to have you with us. Thank you so much, Bryan, for joining us on the show.
Amy, Ed, Sophie, it's wonderful to be here, and I look forward to the conversation. When I saw that I was reading Sophie's background, I thought, oh no, man, I'm going to get grilled on this one. She seems like a smart cookie, but
He's super smart.
It's good to know that the generation that's behind us is going to lead us in the right path. So it's great to be here, Amy.
Oh, awesome. Okay. We need to get started because, Bryan, you have a massive life and career, but I want to hear it from you. If you can give us some cliff notes as to what brought you to us today, because it's powerful.
Yeah, I'll kind of back into it, kind of what I do now. Right now, I run my own consulting practice, focus a lot around leadership development, executive coaching, and pulling teams together from the corporate world, pulling teams together and helping them kind of work together more effectively as a team. And I've been doing this for about 11 years. And prior to that, I was in the corporate world. I was a VP of human resources, held several kind of senior level roles within human resources, managing the entire function, running different leadership development parts, and kind of that time when I was in the corporate world to transitioned into my own business. I had seen a lot of deaths in the family or friends, and I thought I want to make sure that I'm living a fulfilling life. And so I purposefully went in to run my own business because I had young kids at the time. And so right now I have two teenage boys. One's a freshman, one's a junior. So Ed, I applaud everything you do because I'm using somebody, one of your competitors or your colleagues to help us make that transition into college, because it was a little different than when I went.
For sure.
So, prior to that, I've worked in technology, I've worked in financial services, and just had some great mentors and leaders to work with. As you talked about, endurance, I have, for most of my life, had some endurance kind of athlete capabilities and just enjoyed taking on big events. I remember I was a young teenager and did my first bike ride with my parents about 200 miles from the San Francisco Bay Area up to Yosemite. And that got me hooked on long distance cycling. And so I did a bunch of others throughout California and then eventually across the United States when I was 20. And then, I've done a bunch of 100, 200 mile rides in a day, and then wanted to do a 300 mile ride in 24 hours. Kind of my first time going through the night to understand what is it like. Now, Sophie, if you haven't done an all-nighter, you
I've not. That has not been.
So as part of your college experience, and I hope your mom's not listening, you will eventually, and it is a different experience to be up at 4 a.m, having gone through the night. And so, I wanted to understand what that was like kind of on a bicycle. And as I was finishing that, I thought, okay, I need to get into running. And then, did a marathon, started training up for longer stuff, and eventually did 200 miles around Lake Tahoe, which was just this amazing experience. So I've always had that desire to kind of push yourself. And then after doing that, a number of people came and said, I could never do that. And whenever I hear somebody say I could never do that, it just pulls at me, because it's like, you probably could. And so I interviewed 100 people to understand, what is it they do? And these were executives or ultra distance athletes. What is it they do? And I know we'll get that into the book, or into the discussion. And then lastly, I love to travel. And so my wife and I traveled for a year right before we got married, actually for 7 months. And then we took our kids out of school for a year, a couple of years ago before COVID, and traveled kind of through, I think, about 30 countries. So we've traveled extensively, and just that's just an important part of who I am. So that's my Cliff Notes, Amy.
That was excellent. I have to say, fantastic Cliff Notes. If you could come in and help also some of the coaching I do to help professionals know how to do just that. Now, I also have to share, Bryan, that I have been guilty at times for moving the car in a parking lot to go to a different store in the same shopping center. So what you have just found now reminded me how active I am not. And as soon as we're done with this show, I'm going to go run up and down the stairs 20 times. So thank you.
I've done the same thing, Amy. So it's okay.
Especially if I'm in heels. I get a stiletto or wedge exception.
Yeah. Well, no, I could not do anything if I were in heels.
Wow. Okay, Sophie and Ed, I'm going to let you guys decide who goes first. I'm going to be quiet now.
I'm going to let the guest host come on in and intimidate Bryan and make him feel worse about his accomplishment. Sophie, the floor is yours.
Man, I'm already intimidated.
By the way, I love how Sophie's wearing like pigtails and a hat. She's going to intimidate you from Georgia Tech with those pigtails.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
Maybe not so much intimidation, but I'm wondering, you've clearly done a lot of physically strenuous and endurance things. How do you translate that physical endurance to business? And how do you help people do that as well?
Yeah, and there really isn't a big difference. And that was one of the things when I was interviewing. So I interviewed 100 people for the book. And I wanted to understand, is there a difference between what a CEO does or any C-level person does versus an ultra distance person, an ultra distance athlete? And minimally, I looked at, on the business side, I looked at somebody that is at the top of their game. They're C-level. They're general manager. They've started up their own business. And then on the ultra distance side, I looked at somebody who had done the equivalent of like an Ironman or more, run 100 miles or more. And so that was, and I saw a tremendous amount of similarities between what they do. And a couple of them, and there's all sorts of one, is they're very focused. They're very focused on where they want to go. And so they don't just look out 3 months or 6 months. They're looking out 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so it's that focus and being very deliberate about, how they go about getting it. So that was one of the biggest things. And they're not afraid to fail. Everybody I talked to at some point had failed along the lines, but they knew how to get up and move along. So those, we can talk about a bunch, but those are just a couple of things that I've heard.
Thank you.
Excellent. Now, Sophie, don't worry. We will be patient. If you have to move, which we know that she's trying to get settled into the library on campus. If she needs to leave us, she'll come back. She'll find another spot, but don't worry about it. Ed, I'm tossing this over to you now.
All right. Well, Bryan, this is a fascinating conversation. And when you're talking about riding at night, I remember before I got remarried and I was a single parent, I had some sleepless nights getting adjusted to that and not having my kids with me. And I remember one night I got on my bike. It was probably 1:30 in the morning, and I drove down the coast. And I thought two things. It was extraordinarily peaceful, and I had to be very focused. But at the same time, I was scared to death that somebody's going to swerve and hit me. Not related. I'm sure actually it is kind of related to this topic. When you're on the road at night, and I guess from an entrepreneur perspective, sometimes you're on the road at night. How do you maintain that focus, and how do you enjoy that ride in that experience? And conversely, how does that relate to being in business?
Yeah. You know, I generally don't like to ride at night a lot, just because the visibility is not nearly as good. And so when I do ride at night, I've got tons of lights that are on, so it at least makes me a little bit more visible. But I did a lot of my night riding before I had kids.
Mm.
And then when I got the kids, when the kids kind of came into the picture per se, it was one of these things. It's like, I need to think that if something happens to me, you know, it's not going to just, if I die, you know, it impacts other people around me. And so how I manage my risk. And I remember the very first time that came to me. My wife and I were out for, you know, I think like a 30-mile bike ride. She was several months pregnant, and we had just climbed up to the top of this hill, and we were getting ready to go down the hill. And it was a hill I would usually kind of head down at like 40 miles an hour, 35, 40 miles an hour. And the road was a little bit wet. It was early in the morning. And as I started to accelerate and looking at my speedometer, I thought, you know, if something happens to me, it's going to impact these kids' lives. So I need to slow down. And so it's being able to manage risk. And so how do you do that in the work world is the same. You know, I've talked to a number of people, you know, one guy who founded this company and eventually sold it for $4 billion. And so he's doing all right. And he skis all over the world. Yeah.
A little bit more than all right, hopefully.
Yeah. He's doing okay. And he's this phenomenal skier. And he stands, you know, when he's standing up on a cornice and he's looking down, he says, you know, a lot of people get really scared. And what he looks at is, he goes, you know, we often think about what the worst case scenario could be, you know, which is death, complete annihilation with anything, whether it's work, it's kind of total loss of the entire business, everything. And he goes, I look at what is the realistic worst case scenario and how do I manage to that? Because that worst case scenario, for that to happen, a series of bad things have to happen. And rarely is that going to take. So, you know, it's managing risk. It's realizing that, you know, we often look at that worst case scenario, and how do you back up and look at what the realistic worst case scenario is, which will help you get a little bit further. And it may not stop you from moving forward.
Gotcha. I threw that curveball at you, Bryan. Thanks for taking that on.
Yeah.
We warned him.
Yeah, we did. But it was only a one-part question, so you can't.
I know. I'm waiting for your 4-part
I'm
question.
really trying not to.
Yeah.
But you have to dissect those ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're jumping on it too? Come on, girl. Actually, the question I really wanted to ask you was about something I read in your bio, and it talked about how your expertise is to help people push beyond their limits, even though they might not know what that is yet. And I'm curious if you could speak to that from a parent's perspective. How do you know when to push a young person? How do you know when to pull them? And how do you know when to just let them have the experience so they can learn something on their own? How have you found balance to that? I suppose there's a work element, but I'm looking for it from a parent's perspective.
Yeah, I don't know. Next question.
I don't either. That's why I'm asking you.
We all say that more often.
Yeah. My kids are soon to be 15 and 17, and they're still alive. So I'm happy at that.
That's half the battle.
And I think I know after the fact. And I'll give you an example. We were traveling around the world in 2017. We were out for a year. We were in Guatemala, and the safety standards in Guatemala are a little bit different than the safety standards here in the US. And my son is 8. And we go into this cave, and we don't have flashlights, but every other person is holding a candle, and there's probably 10 of us. And we're with somebody that knows where they're going. And there's probably 10 of us that are going in, and every other person's holding a candle. I'm holding a candle. My son can't touch the bottom, but he does have a life preserver on. And I'm constantly asking, I ask this question, and my wife and I ask this question all the time, is did we go too far? Were we irresponsible in taking them in? And we made it out fine. But life has risks. And sometimes we go across the line, and And so I don't know the heart of your question, or the heart of it, but I think we have to kind of push them a little bit further than where they think they go. And I'll give you that example. I mean, at the time, my 8-year-old son, he didn't want, I mean, he would say no to kind of everything. We'd say, hey, you want to go into this? No. And he didn't have that adventurous spirit. And my other son would say yes to everything. And so we kept kind of putting him into situations that were a little bit uncomfortable. And then the next time put him into a situation that was, again, a little bit more uncomfortable. And you get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
my
that's
line right there. I
yeah,
love it.
I mean, you do. I'm doing a keynote for a group in a couple of weeks, and that's kind of the title of it. You get comfortable being uncomfortable. And over that year, I saw my son from kind of going from no to, yeah, maybe let's do that. Let's explore that. And so it's something that you can learn how to do that. And where it kind of came to an epiphany a couple of weeks ago is my son came back about 2 months ago and said, hey, Dad, I want to ride 100 miles on my bike. Now, as a father who's written a book about stuff like that and done something like that, there's no way I can say that's a bad idea. In my head, I'm thinking that is a bad idea because the furthest he'd written is like 25 miles. And it was not a good experience. And so his friend wanted to do it. Now he wants to do it. It's like, I have to support him. This is his idea. So how do I support him to do it safely? And to be honest with you, if I had to bet money whether he was going to make it, I don't know which side I would have bet, because riding 100 miles is a long way to go, especially when you've never done it before. And they did it. And so it's that confidence. And a year earlier, and I think where he got that confidence, a year earlier, I had thrown out the idea to the family. I said, what do you guys think about walking for 24 hours? I've done stuff like that. My wife, who was an Ironman, my wife and my kids hadn't done 24 hours.
Wow. Consecutive.
We started,
Wow.
we start at 7 a.m. and we finish at 7 a.m. the next day. And so I just threw the idea out. And surprisingly, everybody said yes. I mean, that's the type of family I live in now. And they all said yes. And so I said, okay. And so we got up at 7 a.m. and we just started walking. And we didn't know exactly where we were going. We were just going to walk around our town. And if we got hungry, we'd go get something to eat. Shortly after dinner, we'd walked 24 miles and my son's feet started to hurt. And what we agreed upon as a family, that we will all start together and we will finish together. So if one person wants to stop, we all stop. And my son's feet started to hurt. And I asked myself, Ed, this time to your point, I asked myself, are we pushing him too far? And so I went back, I was talking to my wife. I said, his feet are hurting. He's starting to cry. I think we need to seriously consider stopping. And so I went up and I was talking to him, and we put some Advil in him. And I said, I think why don't we see if we can get to 26.2 miles, which is a marathon. And it's like, that's pretty darn cool for a 14-year-old. And I said, what do you think about just like going a little bit further and then we'll stop? And he goes, I don't want to stop. And it's like, okay, he gets it, but I have to ask that question. Are we going too far? And we made it to 26.2. I went up, I'm checking on him, how he's doing. His feet are fine now. He goes, yeah, I don't want to stop. Unfortunately, my wife had gotten into her head that we're going to be stopping soon. And it was the mental part. So we made it till 1 a.m. We made it 33 miles, but it was that mental part that she had gotten in her head. She wants that we're going to stop. And we ended up stopping. And next morning she comes up, she goes, I wish we didn't stop. It wasn't the kids that stopped us. And it's that regret. Yes. And so we did this last Thanksgiving. So I threw the idea out to my youngest son. I said, what do you think about trying this again? He goes, yeah, let's do it. So it's that we failed at our attempt to walk 24 hours. But it gave him the confidence that he can do more than like he'd ever done before. And I think that led him to do the 100-mile ride, which was successful. So
Oh my gosh.
we can learn, and it's that, you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's where you grow.
So a couple of things on that, and then I got one question. I'll turn it back over to Sophie and Amy. First of all, Amy, we got to figure out who came up with that first. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. Is it Bryan or it's me? Because if it's me and Bryan quoted me, I'm going to be famous.
Really,
let's just go with that, okay?
I want to
Put it on a shirt.
Stay neutral.
Oh, it's going on a shirt. Whoever gets on the shirt first, Bryan.
It's whose name's going to be under it, huh, Ed?
Yeah, exactly.
We'll take a poll.
I wanted to kind of get into the topic of the book and the title, Epic. And I know it's an acronym, and I was just looking at this: envision, plan, iterate, collaborate. I think most people know what most of those are, but I don't know if most people understand what the word iterate means and how it applies in business and life. Could you kind of give us an overview, if we got a couple of minutes, on Epic, but really zero in on what iterate means and how significant that is?
Nice question, Ed.
I will. So E is envision the big things in life you want to accomplish. P is how do you put a plan in place to do it. The I is iterate. We'll get into that in a moment. C is how do you learn from others, collaborate. And then lastly, you got to go perform it. So what does iterate mean? You don't start off running a marathon. You start off running a 5K. And then when you get comfortable and you can do a 5K successfully, you run a 10K. And so iterate is that ability to start small and grow bigger. So if you want to be the president of fill in the blank, you don't start with that. What are the different levels you need to start with and work your way up? And as you iterate, and it's often used with a lot of software folks, the iteration process is you do something. If you fail, you try something else. And once you get to that, you try something else, and you just kind of work your way up. So that's what iterate is in a nutshell.
I lied, but because I can't ask 15 level questions anymore, I have one other question, and it has to do with this idea of young people and expectations. I see, Bryan, there's a lot of young people who are like, I want to be successful. I want to be successful right now.
Right now.
And the journey is like, I need it in 2 minutes, like I'm microwaving a burrito. What would you say to a young person who's trying or wants to be successful and really hasn't doesn't understand that process? Do you have any words of wisdom on patience or iteration or collaboration? What could you say to them to help them understand overnight successes don't happen on every
Play
day?
the long game. Yeah. I mean, just play the long game and know where you want to go 10, 15, 20 years out. And what are you doing today that will get you in that direction? I'll tell you, Ed, as a former head of HR who would hire a lot of folks right out of college and think, okay, you hired me. When am I going to be a VP? Mm-hmm. I live in the Silicon Valley, and I saw that a lot. And it's a challenge, because what they can do is they can go to company X over here and kind of get that next title. And so instead of chasing those titles, instead of chasing kind of the next big paycheck, chase the things that will drive to your passion, chase the things that will get you to your longer term goals. And so playing that long game is something, you got to really look at is what I would say.
Very cool.
Bryan,
right,
you're
Sophie,
speaking to me.
Amy, do your thing.
Nope, Sophie. She's been so patient.
Ed was calling me out a bit there about wanting immediate success. I've definitely felt a bit of that before, maybe a lot.
It's okay. It's okay to want it.
Sophie's not a big achiever at all.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you're very successful and you're going to go a long way, and just realize that, okay, sometimes it may take a little bit longer. But yeah, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you anymore.
No worries. So one thing I've been thinking about is, like, as I'm heading into college and we've been doing all these orientation things and advisors are giving us advice, we hear a lot of these like leadership platitudes, like, don't be afraid of failure, get comfortable being uncomfortable. And you hear them from the people who are the top of their fields. You hear them from your son who's, walking those 100 or 33 miles. And you hear them from top performing business executives and top performing athletes. but we all hear them, even if you're not that. So what's the difference between those people who hear those platitudes and incorporate them in their lives, and the people who hear them and are unsuccessful? And how do those, or not unsuccessful, but not getting exactly where they want to be, what's the difference between those people? And if someone who's not quite there yet, what steps would you recommend that they take to get to that higher performing level?
Yeah, no, good question. One reads it and then does it. The other one reads
Yeah.
it, and quotes it. So
Ooh, I like that.
That's a good way of putting it.
so it's it's that ability to just do it. And Nike says it best, just do it.
Yeah.
And when I talk to these 100 people, I mean, I was surprised. I thought that they were going to come across as this big ego, and everybody was very humble. And I kept saying, I mean, look at what you've accomplished. But what they do is they take this stuff, or they've already incorporated it into their world. So they know they've had failures.
Mm-hmm.
They're open about their fails, and they've learned from them. So rarely do you see that they've had the same failure twice, because they have it, they learn from it, and then they adjust, they iterate. So, I mean, I think the big difference is the people that I interviewed, the people that, you hear from that are successful, is, they take these ideas and they build on them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like
That's fascinating.
I'd like to think that I'm coming up with all this kind of brilliant stuff, but Ed came up with it first, and so
don't tell him that, Bryan. We have to live with him all the time.
Yeah, is his ego going to get? We're going to need a bigger camera.
Oh yeah, you can expect that.
Yeah, this isn't new stuff, and it's just, how do you take some of those things that you're hearing in some of your classes, or from your parents maybe, and because I know, because they've got some good ideas, and take it, listen to it, maybe try it, and sometimes it's going to work, and sometimes it's not. And then when it doesn't work, okay, why didn't it work? Maybe I ought to try something else. One of the things that was really cool that I learned is there is no one right path to success.
Yes.
Amy's had a path, Ed's had a path, I've had a path, you've had a path. And I look at the 5 elements of epic performance: envision, plan, iterate, collaborate, and perform. And the 100 people I talked to, there were people that were really good at envision but couldn't iterate, or really good at iterate and couldn't plan. But what I found is most people were good at like 2 of them, and they knew how to compensate for the other 2 or 3 that they weren't good at. And so there was no right path to success. I look at, and my son's, I mean, I have this book that's on, has the 5 elements, and this is how you get to success. And my son goes and rides 100 miles, and he envisioned it and he performed it. He didn't plan it, he didn't iterate it, and he didn't.
There's no iteration.
Yeah, there was no iteration, there was no planning, a little bit of collaboration. And it's like, okay, you don't need to have all 5 to be great, but you better have 2 that you're really good at and know how to compensate for the other.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I think being able to recognize that sometimes we're not going to be 100% fantastic at all of these things, it can be sometimes demotivating if we're like, oh, well, I'm really great at envisioning, but then I really suck at planning. I guess I just can't do it at all. Doing something is much, much better than just giving up completely.
I mean, my first interview, I was interviewing the CEO of a company. This was the company that was sold for $4 billion, and I worked for him. Phenomenal leader, and I'm talking through him about kind of envision, plan, iterate, collaborate, and perform. And he goes, I'm really good at iterating, and I'm really good at planning, but I'm not good at envisioning. And this was a guy that I thought, man, he's got this great vision. He knew how to get people to envision, to strategize, and then he knew how to make it happen. And so there is a time, and I'll say this in my house a fair amount of time, there's time enough where it's like, you got to really be good at something, but sometimes good enough is good enough, and you got to move on. I'm coaching this one person right now, and he wants everything to be perfect. And you may have heard, like, perfect is the enemy of the good. It's like, sometimes don't worry about perfect. Just worry about good enough. And you got to know when. If you're a pilot building an engine, good enough isn't good enough. You want it to be better.
Yes, definitely.
But, sometimes you're going to have to make a decision. Do I spend my time on this class to get the A, or do I spend a whole bunch of time that's going to take away from here and get the B? And so you have to kind of manage that. It's all about managing priorities. And so you can't be great at everything.
Bryan, I love that you've had these talking points, and you already answered 3 of the questions I was going to ask you, which is great, which everybody else is happy. It keeps me quiet. However, and this one's a little bit more tricky, but especially when you're speaking to young adults, which I know, especially if you've got 2 at home, you already know this inside and out, and what we need them to understand. I want you to discuss collaborating, because I know for myself, I know what my skills are, where my lane is. But without collaboration, I know that I can't fully go that next step. And I think that our young adults are so driven in high school. You have to do this. These are your grades. These are your APs. This is your college app. Now you're there, and this is all on you. Let's discuss that importance, especially now, even for Sophie starting college. Mm-hmm. The collaboration is a key component lifelong.
Yeah. I mean, I look at the undergraduate school I went to, and I wouldn't be able to get into it now with the grades that I had when I was coming out of high school. And so I went to the University of California. So it was a good school. And it's like the level is getting higher and higher. And so the people that are going into college are just, I've chatted with a bunch because I've helped them with resumes, and I look at their resumes and think, my God, I thought I was pretty decent in high school. It's like, I don't even hold, I can't even compare to these kids, which gives me some confidence in the future. When I was hiring folks, I wasn't hiring them for their technical, most of the time I wasn't hiring them for their technical competence. I wasn't hiring them because they were the greatest engineer. They were the greatest recruiter. They were the greatest whatever, or they were even, they were really good at it, but that's not why I was hiring them. I was hiring them because they knew how to work with other people. They knew how to collaborate with other people, because that is going to be what's going to determine whether they're successful kind of moving up in their ladder. And how do you work with those people? I think, some of the mistakes I've made earlier is I haven't relied enough on people. And I tried to kind of, figure I can do it myself. And I hadn't asked enough of those questions. There's most of the people out here are a whole much smarter than I am. And there's probably 3 other people on this call that are smarter than me. And so how do I leverage that expertise more so? And I was always, there's a lot of times where I was hesitant to ask, because if I ask, Ed's opinion or Sophie's opinion, it shows that maybe I'm not as smart as I could be. And it's a blow to my ego, but I have to turn that around and realize that, God, Ed and Sophie have a different experience. Mm-hmm. They have different knowledge than I do. Maybe they can add to my picture. And so, think about, as you're working with your colleagues on a project for a class, is those aren't your competitors. Those are your colleagues, because when you go into the leave college and you're working, you got to work with those people, and the people that are most successful know how to work with their colleagues really, really well.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
No, I'm only taking questions from Sophie or Amy.
Perfect. That's smart. That's smart on your part, by the way. That's the smartest thing you've said all day.
Yes, ever.
All right, Ed, go ahead.
I think Amy's question was fantastic. And I think what it reminded me of is I was working with a young lady who's working on an essay for admissions. And the subject matter is about leadership. And she was telling me about a camp that she was in. And she was assigned to manage this dining room table, like 8 people, right? And one of the young people that she was working with was difficult and challenging. And it had more to do with, like, he's been there a couple of years. He was doing the same job. And I'm curious, in theory, things sound great, but in reality and application, it can be a little bit challenging. So how does a young person take that individual? Maybe you got 2 or 3 points that you can give. Take that individual and not force them to be part of it, but train them up a little bit so that they can experience leadership when they don't have the experience of being a leader in challenging situations. Bryan, is this something you can go, hey, this is what you would want to do, considering they don't know what to do?
Yeah.
Mm.
When I have been my most successful in doing that, Ed, is when I can understand and get into the shoes of that other person.
Mm-hmm.
Because what's going on in their head? How do they, and I do a lot with communication styles, and how Amy may communicate may be different than how you may communicate, may be different than how Sophie communicates. And I'm working with one person right now, and they're very technical, and it's like I got to give them the facts, and they don't care about kind of the people side. And where somebody else may be, it's like, I don't need the facts, just give me the high level points of view. So one is being able to understand how do they receive information, what's kind of maybe a little on their communication style. So I do a lot around that. But it's also getting into their shoes. I mean, I remember probably 25 years ago, I was working with a gentleman, and we were colleagues, and he was a phenomenal leader. And, he wasn't somebody that was trying to climb the corporate ladder. But he was just a very likable guy. Within a short amount of time, within a year, his daughter died. One of his parents died, and one of his wife's parents died.
Wow, that's a lot.
And I saw him, be maybe a little bit more short at times. I saw him come across different than he normally would. Now, had I not known what was going on in his head, I would have thought, well, he's being an asshole. Sorry if we have to bleep that out. And so it's kind of understanding what's going on in that other person's head and what's important to them. And I'll tell you, it's helped me, when I'm at my best with my wife, it's because I'm trying to understand what's going on with her. When I'm not, it's because I haven't done enough to understand what's going on with her. And it's the same whether you're on a college, working on a project with a bunch of your college friends, or you're working on something in your career. So it's how do we really understand what's going on? There are times where it's like, yeah, that person is a jerk, and maybe they need to go. That's not where you start, though.
That's fantastic. Excellent. Thank you for that insight. I appreciate that, Bryan.
Yeah, good question, Ed. I'm glad I let you ask it.
We are. We're going to keep him around still. Sophie, do you have any last thoughts?
This has been a fascinating conversation, especially as I haven't started classes yet, but I do soon.
Yeah.
One of the things I was sort of thinking about is my role. I think Ed asked earlier about how do parents tell their kids, help their kids with this like epic performance. But how do I, as a student also, or as a child, like a child of my parents, communicate with them? Because I think sometimes it feels like my parents maybe don't understand that these are things that I'm trying to embrace in my own life. These are principles that I want to embrace, but it's difficult. It's difficult to create new habits. It's difficult to be successful at a young age. So how you sort of touched it on epic from like the parent side, but how can I, as the daughter of someone, have a better communication with my parents about and ask them how to help me embody epic performance?
Wow.
I love her.
Yeah.
That's why she gets paid the big bucks, Bryan.
Yeah, obviously.
I wish more, but
yeah, you should ask for a raise, Sophie. Sorry, Amy. Just have an open conversation with them. I mean, you're an exciting time in college, and you're going to try new things. And, I think you just ask them that question, because what they may see may be different than what I would say, which is going to be different than Amy's going to say or Ed's going to say. So, try to have an open conversation with them about, how do you push yourself more? Sometimes, I find that if I give some advice to my kids, they don't listen to me because I'm their parent.
Yes,
Where
I have
if
done that
Amy,
before.
yeah, where if Amy were to give them the exact same
Oh, they would love
advice,
me.
they would think, oh my gosh, she's brilliant. Why didn't you come up with that, Dad? And so the other thing is, how are you open to some of the crazy, wacky things that your parents could say? Because I'm sure, and I was a kid once, and I will tell you, my parents had said some things that I think were totally stupid. And now I think about it, it's like, it wasn't totally stupid. It was pretty smart. And so how are you having kind of that open mind of, hey, maybe my parents with their 40, 50 years of experience may know something. And I guess that would be another way to frame it. But how do you have that dialogue? I will venture to say that if you pose that question to your parents, they will go, we'd love to talk.
Yeah. I definitely. I think having establishing that communication is essential, because when I'm not talking and when my parents aren't talking, or someone else, just young adults, it can create difficult boundaries, and it's sometimes hard to cross. It's hard to cross that if that boundary has been there for a while. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
And how do you find, time to kind of break those barriers down? I mean, I know that when I was, my son and I are training for a marathon right now. And so we're going out and running. And so when we're out running, it's just the two of us with no distractions, no phones, no headphones, no screen. And we can start to have a conversation. And so whereas if we're sitting at home and there's a TV on or a screen available, we can't have that conversation. So I'm really, really enjoying that time. And how do you maybe get out on a walk with your mom or your dad and kind of start to talk about things? They're probably right now, my guess is they're missing you so much because
I can
their
imagine.
baby is gone. And so they can't wait to come and talk to you. So
Mhm.
take advantage of it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so impressed that Bryan and his son can run and talk. I was trying to
I
figure if I was running, I would not be talking.
That
I
happens at
wouldn't
times.
either.
Amy, I think I lost you there for a second.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh,
I got you, Amy.
thank you.
I did
Sorry,
as
it was
well.
just you.
Oh, I see what she did. She left me out of the conversation, so I
I
couldn't
muted him
participate.
for just that moment.
Yeah,
No,
see?
this has just been absolutely unbelievable. Bryan, what a tremendous value you have brought to our listeners, to this show, to us. I mean, we have all just tremendously taken in so much. You've reminded me of those core values of really finding that endurance in everything that I'm doing as well, personally and professionally. So thank you for the reminders today, because it was really powerful.
Yeah, it's just a pleasure to chat with the three of you and just the different perspectives. I mean, it's like, yeah, I've been where you are, Sophie, before, but it's
Mhm.
different than when I was there. And so I love being able to chat with people that are college or right out of college because I learn a tremendous amount. So thank you to the three of you for a wonderful conversation. I love it.
Well, I think that's a pretty good place to wrap this up. So, Bryan, like the lady said, is a fascinating conversation. I encourage people to go out and get Bryan's books, Epic Performance. I love
Link
the
is in the show notes. You will be able to find it there, wherever you are listening or watching this podcast.
I love the acronym. It makes perfect sense. It's pretty easy to remember. And the best for you and your son as you go on this journey together, do this marathon. I didn't realize we were going to have a conversation with a living, breathing Forrest Gump, but we did, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um, and I got to tell you guys something. This is why I love doing this podcast, because we find individuals who can speak to young people like Sophie, adults like Amy and myself as we're continuing on our journey. So, you know what? This is why we do this podcast. And this is why we love people commenting and sharing it. So if you like what you've heard today, give us a thumbs up. If you think somebody else would benefit from it, please share it with them and subscribe, because we get these types of episodes and these types of guests all the time. So on behalf of Sophie, our co-host today, and Amy, co-host, this is Ed Sanderson, and this has been the Education, Career, and Beyond podcast.